What happens when a single moment of recognition becomes the key that unlocks decades of buried family secrets? What if the woman mixing cocktails for tourists was actually the missing link in a chain of lies that powerful people had forged with blood? For Jessica, Jess Thompson, a 26-year-old bartender working the late shift at an upscale hotel in downtown Portland, that moment came on a rainy November night when she served a martini to a man whose vintage watch would reveal a connection to her past that someone had killed to hide. But one storm-swept evening, a gleaming timepiece would tick away the final seconds of a 30-year-old lie. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Pinnacle Hotel's rooftop bar as Jessica Thompson polished glasses behind the mahogany counter. The city lights of Portland blurred into watercolor streaks through the storm, creating an atmosphere that was both romantic and melancholy. At 26, she'd been tending bar for 8 years, working her way up from dive bars in the suburbs to this exclusive establishment where politicians and business moguls paid $20 for cocktails. The bar was nearly empty at 11. On a Tuesday night, just a few die-hard drinkers nursing expensive whiskey and watching the storm rage over the Willamette River. Jess was counting down the minutes until closing, when the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. The man who emerged commanded attention without effort. He was probably in his late 50s, with distinguished silver hair and the kind of expensive suit that whispered rather than shouted wealth. He moved with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room, his leather shoes silent on the polished floor as he approached the bar. "Evening," Jess said with her professional smile. "What can I get you?" The man settled onto a leather bar stool with practiced ease, his sharp grey eyes surveying the premium bottles behind her. "Tanqueray martini, very dry, 2 olives, no ice." In the glass, his voice carried the crisp authority of expensive education and old money. Jess had served enough wealthy customers to recognize the type, used to getting exactly what they wanted, exactly when they wanted it. "Coming right up," she said, reaching for the gin. As she prepared the drink, the man checked his watch, and Jess caught sight of something that made her heart skip a beat. It was an exquisite vintage Rolex, probably from the 1960s, with a distinctive mother-of-pearl face. But what stopped her cold wasn't the obvious expense. It was the engraving on the band. Etched into the platinum in flowing script was a name, Edward Mitchell, with love, Catherine, 1962. And below that, almost too small to read, were 3 intertwined hearts. Jess's hand trembled as she set down the gin bottle. She'd seen that exact engraving before, not on this watch, but on a locket that had been her most treasured possession since childhood, a locket her foster father Frank had given her when she turned 18, claiming it was the only thing left from her mysterious past. "Excuse me," Jess heard herself saying, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's a beautiful watch." "Is it a family piece?" The man's head snapped up, his piercing gaze locking onto hers with sudden intensity. The casual sophistication vanished, replaced by something sharp and dangerous. "What did you say?" Jess's heart hammered against her ribs. The engraving, Edward Mitchell and Catherine. "I have a locket with the same inscription." A muscle in the man's jaw twitched. He slowly turned his wrist, studying the watch as if seeing it for the first time. When he spoke, his voice had dropped to a menacing whisper. "This watch belonged to my brother, Edward Mitchell. It was a wedding gift from his wife in 1962. There are no other pieces with this inscription. There never were." The name Mitchell hit Jess like a physical blow. She'd heard it whispered by Frank in his darker moments, usually after too many beers when he thought she wasn't listening. But he'd always claimed it was just the name of an old army buddy, nothing more. "But there is another piece," Jess insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. "I could show you—" "Miss!" The man interrupted, his tone cutting through her words like ice. "Whatever trinket you possess is either a crude forgery or—" He paused, letting the implication hang in the air like a threat. "Perhaps it came into your possession through questionable means." The accusation struck Jess like a slap. Frank Thompson was the most honest man she'd ever known, a retired construction worker who'd taken in a frightened 8-year-old and given her a home, a family, a chance at life. "My father is not a thief," Jess said, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. The man reached into his jacket and withdrew a platinum money clip, peeling off several $100 bills and placing them on the bar. It was more than Jess made in a week. "For your time and your creative storytelling," he said, standing without having touched his martini. "My name is William Mitchell. If you or your father wish to pursue this matter further, my attorneys can be reached through Mitchell Industries." He moved toward the elevator, then paused, his cold gaze finding hers one final time. "Miss Thompson, Jessica Thompson." "Miss Thompson, I suggest you forget this conversation ever happened. The Mitchell family has little patience for con artists or fortune hunters. We protect our legacy by any means necessary." The elevator doors closed behind him with a whisper, leaving Jess standing behind the bar with the echo of his threat and a growing certainty that her carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Jess didn't sleep that night. She sat in the kitchen of the small house she shared with Frank, staring at the silver locket that had been her most precious possession for 18 years. In the lamplight, the tarnished surface seemed to hold secrets, while the engraving on the back told a story she'd never fully understood. Edward Mitchell, with love, Catherine, 1962. Surrounded by 3 intertwined hearts. Frank had given her the locket on her 18th birthday, along with a story that had always seemed more fairy tale than fact. Her parents, he'd claimed, had been killed in a car accident when she was 8. There had been no other family, no documentation beyond hastily signed guardianship papers, and no explanations about her life before that terrible day. But Frank had told her the locket belonged to her mother, Catherine, and that it was proof. She'd been loved, even if she couldn't remember it. The 3rd heart, he'd said, was for the daughter Catherine had cherished above all else. Now, faced with William Mitchell's absolute certainty that no other piece existed, Jess began to question everything she'd been told. Frank was 72 now, still sharp but increasingly frail from years of hard labor. At his age, shocking revelations might be more than his heart could handle. Yet Jess couldn't shake the feeling that Frank knew far more than he'd ever admitted. As dawn broke over the city, Jess made a decision. She called in sick to work, something she'd never done, and spent the day at the Portland Public Library, diving into digital archives and genealogy databases, searching for any connection between the Thompson and Mitchell families. What she found painted a picture of extraordinary wealth built on a foundation of timber and shipping money. The Mitchells had arrived in Oregon in the 1880s, and within 3 generations had built an empire that dominated the Pacific Northwest. They owned lumber mills, shipping lines, and vast tracts of forest land throughout Oregon and Washington. Their name adorned hospitals, universities, and cultural institutions from Portland to Seattle. But the deeper Jess dug, the more she found. Whispers of environmental destruction carefully managed and labor disputes that ended in mysterious deaths. The family seemed to exist in a shadow of barely contained violence, their success purchased with more than just shrewd business deals. She found scattered references to family members. William was the current patriarch, having inherited control from his father, Charles. But there were gaps in the family tree that intrigued her, missing branches that seemed to have been deliberately pruned from the public record. One newspaper clipping from 1995 caught her attention. Mitchell, heir, dies. In Logging Accident, the brief article described how Edward Mitchell, William's younger brother, had been killed when a tree fell during a routine timber inspection. He was survived by his wife Catherine and their young daughter. The article mentioned that Catherine had declined to comment and had left the area following the tragedy. But what made Jess's blood run cold was the accompanying photograph. Edward Mitchell stood beside a logging truck, his dark hair and easy smile remarkably similar to Jess's own features. And around his neck, clearly visible, was a chain that looked exactly like the one that held her locket. That evening, Jess sat in Frank's favorite recliner, the library printouts spread on the coffee table between them. Her foster father was watching the evening news, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his weathered hands gripped the chair's arms. "Frank," Jess began gently, "I need to ask you about something, and I need you to tell me the truth." Frank's faded blue eyes shifted to the papers, and she saw him stiffen. "What's all this, kiddo?" Jess pulled out the photograph of Edward Mitchell, holding it where Frank could see clearly. "This man, Edward Mitchell, he was my father, wasn't he?" A flicker of fear crossed Frank's weathered face. He reached for the remote and muted the television, the sudden silence heavy with unspoken truths. "Where did you get this picture?" "From the newspaper archives. Frank, his last name was Mitchell. That's where the engraving comes from. And Catherine, she was my mother." Frank's hands began to shake, and for a long moment he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I always knew this day would come. Tell me the truth, please." Frank's grip tightened on the chair. "Your mama didn't die in any car accident, Jess. That's just what I told people to keep you safe." The words hung in the air like a confession and a condemnation. Jess felt the world shift beneath her feet. "She came to me in the middle of the night," Frank continued, his voice growing stronger as the truth finally spilled out. "You were sleeping in the back seat of her car. She was beaten, terrified, running from something terrible. She said her husband's family was trying to kill her. The Mitchells, but why? Your daddy had found something out," she said. "Something about the family business that could destroy them all. He was going to go to the authorities, but they killed him first, and my mother." Frank's eyes filled with tears. "3 days after she brought you to me, they found her body in the Columbia River. They said she jumped, said she was distraught over her husband's death. But Catherine wasn't suicidal, Jess. She was a fighter." The revelation was staggering. Jess's entire life had been built on a lie, a necessary lie designed to keep her alive. But now that William Mitchell knew she existed, how long before that protection crumbled? "The locket," Jess whispered. "What did she tell you about it?" "She said it was more than jewelry. She said it was proof of who you were, proof of your father's love. She said if anything happened to her, I should give it to you when you came of age and tell you to find someone named Daniel Brooks." "Who's Daniel Brooks?" "I don't know," Frank admitted, "but she said he was the only person who could help you claim what was rightfully yours. She said he'd been your father's partner and had helped them try to escape." 50 miles away, in a mansion overlooking the Columbia River, William Mitchell stood in his study, a secure phone pressed to his ear. Behind him, rain continued to lash against the windows, the storm showing no signs of abating. "She described the engraving perfectly," he was saying to the voice on the other end. "Edward and Catherine, 1962, 3 hearts. It's the locket, Marcus, after all these years. You're certain it's her, Edward's daughter? She looks exactly like Catherine did at that age. Same eyes, same stubborn chin. There's no doubt." Marcus Webb had been cleaning up Mitchell family. Problems for 30 years, his methods efficient and his silence guaranteed. "What do you want me to do?" "Find out everything about her. Where she's been, who raised her, how much she knows. And Marcus, William's voice hardened, find Daniel Brooks. If he's still alive, he's a liability we can't afford. And the girl? William walked to a wall, safe behind his desk, retrieving a thick file marked Edward Mitchell, deceased. Inside were documents that told the real story of his brother's death, not a logging accident, but a carefully orchestrated murder designed to look like industrial negligence. Edward should have kept his mouth shut, William said more to himself than to Marcus. He should have understood that family loyalty comes before everything else. The girl doesn't know anything yet. We could just keep watching her. No, William's voice was final. She's asking questions, showing interest in the family. If she starts digging, she'll find out about the environmental cover-ups, the worker, safety violations, the bribes. She'll discover what really happened to her parents. So we eliminate her? We eliminate the problem permanently, make it look like an accident. Robbery gone wrong, maybe. The Portland area has such a high crime rate. As William hung up the phone, he returned to the safe and retrieved one more item, a matching locket to the one his brother had given Catherine. It had been part of a set, commissioned for their first anniversary. Edward had kept one, Catherine the other, and their daughter was supposed to inherit both. Of course, Catherine had never gotten the chance to pass on her legacy. And if William had his way, neither would her daughter. The next morning brought news that made Jess's blood run cold. She arrived at the hotel to find police cars in the parking lot, and her manager David Walsh speaking in hushed tones with two detectives. "Jess, thank God you're here," David said when he saw her. "There was a break-in at your house last night. Frank is okay, but someone ransacked the place pretty thoroughly." Jess's heart sank as she realized what they'd been looking for. "Is Frank hurt?" "Shaken up, but physically fine. He's staying with his neighbor for now. The police think it was a burglary, but..." David lowered his voice. "They didn't take anything valuable. TV, computer, jewelry box, all still there." But Jess knew better. The Mitchells had decided she was a threat, and they were looking for evidence of her connection to the family. She had to find Daniel Brooks, whoever he was, before their people found her. She spent her lunch break at the library again, searching for any connection between Daniel Brooks and environmental law or the Mitchell family. What she found surprised her. Daniel Brooks wasn't just any lawyer. He was a prominent environmental attorney who'd spent 30 years fighting corporate pollution and worker safety violations. More importantly, according to his firm's website, he'd led several high-profile cases against timber companies in the 1990s, including a class action lawsuit against Mitchell Industries for contaminating groundwater near their lumber mills. She found his office number and called from a payphone outside the library. "Brooks Environmental Law," came a professional voice. "Mr. Brooks, my name is Jessica Thompson. I think you knew my father, Edward Mitchell." There was a long pause. On the other end, when Brooks spoke again, his voice had changed completely. "My God, Jessica, after all these years, where are you?" "Portland. Mr. Brooks, I need help. People are trying to hurt me, and I don't understand why." "Because you're Edward's daughter, and that makes you the most dangerous person alive to the Mitchell family. Don't go home. Don't trust anyone. Meet me at Pioneer Courthouse Square in 1 hour. Come alone and watch for anyone following you." Daniel Brooks was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and the intense eyes of someone who'd spent his career fighting impossible battles. He found Jess at the designated meeting spot, and without a word, gestured for her to follow him to a crowded coffee shop where they could blend into the lunch crowd. "Show me the locket," he said quietly. Jess pulled it from beneath her shirt. Brooks's expression grew sad as he examined the engraving. "I was there when Edward had this made," he said softly. "It was supposed to be a surprise for Catherine's birthday, but she loved it so much he gave it to her early." "You were friends with my parents?" I was Edward's law school roommate, then his environmental consulting partner for 10 years. We were working together to expose the Mitchell family's systematic destruction of old-growth forests and contamination of water supplies throughout the Pacific Northwest. Brooks pulled out his phone and showed Jess a photograph from the early 1990s, a younger version of himself, standing with a man who looked remarkably like Jess and a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. This was taken a week before they died, Brooks explained. Your parents had finally gathered enough evidence to bring criminal charges against William and the entire Mitchell Industries board of directors. What kind of evidence? Environmental. Crimes, worker safety violations, bribery of federal inspectors, decades of systematic law-breaking. Your father had access to internal documents as a family member, and your mother had discovered financial records that proved the company knew. Their operations were killing people. What happened to them? Brooks's face darkened. William found out about our investigation. He had your father killed first. Made it look like a logging accident, but the tree was deliberately weakened. Your mother escaped with you and our evidence files, but she was too scared to go to the authorities. She knew William had judges and politicians in his pocket. So she ran. For 3 weeks, I helped her stay hidden while we tried to figure out how to protect you both. But William eventually tracked her down. He offered to let you live if she turned over all our evidence and agreed to disappear forever. But he killed her anyway. The suicide was staged. William never intended to honor any deal. He took our evidence and had her murdered, but Catherine was smarter than he gave her credit for. She made copies of everything and hid them before she went to meet him. Jess's mind raced. You're saying there's still evidence after all these years? Your mother hid it in the one place William would never think to look. Brooks reached over and gently lifted the locket, his fingers finding a tiny, almost invisible catch on the side. This isn't just jewelry, Jessica. It's a key. The locket opened to reveal not just the space for a photograph, but a hidden compartment containing a small metal key with a number etched into its surface. Your inheritance isn't just a share of the Mitchell fortune, Brooks said. It's the power to destroy them completely. The key led to a safety deposit box in a small bank across town. The rental fees automatically paid from a trust fund Catherine had established before her death. Inside the fireproof box was a treasure trove of evidence. Internal Mitchell Industries memos documenting environmental crimes, recorded conversations revealing bribery and cover-ups, photographs of contaminated sites, and falsified inspection reports. But the most damning evidence was a video recording made just days before her parents' deaths. In it, they sat together in what appeared to be a hotel room, looking directly into the camera. "If you're watching this," Edward said, his voice steady, "despite the fear in his eyes, it means William succeeded in killing us, but it also means our daughter survived, and she's old enough to learn the truth about her family." Catherine leaned forward, her hand resting protectively on her chest where the locket hung. "Jessica, we want you to know that you were conceived in love and born into hope. Your father tried to stop his family from destroying the environment for profit. When peaceful methods failed, we chose justice over silence." The video continued for another hour, detailing evidence and providing context for the environmental data. By the end, Jess was crying, not just for the parents she'd never known, but for the 18 years of lies that had shaped her life. "What do we do now?" she asked Brooks. "We finish what your parents started," he replied grimly, "but we have to move fast. William knows you're alive, and he won't hesitate to kill you like he killed them." As if summoned by their words, Brooks's phone rang. He answered it with a frown that quickly turned to horror. "What? When? Dear God, we'll be right there." He hung up and turned to Jess, his face ashen. "That was the hospital. Frank Thompson was found unconscious in his home this morning. Carbon monoxide poisoning. They're saying it was a faulty furnace, but Jess felt her world collapse. Frank was all the family she'd ever known, and now the Mitchells had tried to murder him just to send a message. "This ends now," Jess said, her voice hardening with resolve. "I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of people I love getting hurt because of my family's crimes." "Jessica, you don't understand the kind of power we're dealing with." "I understand perfectly," Jess interrupted. "My uncle is a murderer who's been covering his crimes for decades. But he made one mistake. He let me live long enough to find out who I really am." The annual Mitchell Foundation Environmental Gala was Oregon's premier charity event, attracting politicians, business leaders, and environmental activists from across the Pacific Northwest. The irony of William Mitchell receiving an award for forest conservation wasn't lost on Jess as she planned her confrontation. Working with Brooks, she'd spent weeks preparing. They'd made copies of all the evidence and distributed them to journalists, EPA investigators, and federal prosecutors across multiple states. But Jess wanted more than just justice. She wanted William to face his crimes in front of the people who'd enabled him for decades. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of Portland's Nob Hill Riverview, a glittering showcase of Pacific Northwest high society. Jess arrived wearing a simple black dress she'd bought with her final paycheck from the hotel, the silver locket prominently displayed at her throat. She looked nothing like the society debutantes who filled the room, but she carried herself with inherited grace and newfound purpose. She made her way through the crowd, ignoring the curious stares and whispered comments. At the center of it all stood William Mitchell, resplendent in formal wear, accepting congratulations for his latest environmental initiative. Their eyes met across the ballroom, and Jess saw the exact moment when recognition dawned in his cold gray gaze. His practiced smile faltered for just an instant before snapping back into place. "Ladies and gentlemen," William announced, tapping his champagne flute to call for attention, "I'd like to introduce someone very special who's joined us tonight. My niece, Jessica, who's been away from the family for far too long." The room fell silent. Jess had planned to make a dramatic entrance to expose him before he could react. Instead, he'd turned the tables, presenting her as a beloved family member, trying to control the narrative. "Hello, Uncle William," Jess said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "Thank you for finally acknowledging that I exist." "Of course, my dear," William replied smoothly. "Family is sacred to the Mitchells. We've been heartbroken by your absence. Heartbroken enough to murder my parents when they tried to expose your environmental crimes?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. William's mask of avuncular concern never slipped. "I'm afraid grief and confusion have affected my poor niece," he said, his voice full of practiced sympathy. "Losing one's parents at such a young age, growing up without knowing one's heritage, it can create unfortunate delusions." "Delusions backed up by 18 years of evidence," Jess shot back, pulling out a small remote control. "Evidence my parents died trying to preserve." She pressed a button, and every screen in the ballroom, meant to display photos of forest restoration projects, lit up with images from her parents' hidden files. Environmental data, contaminated water samples, recorded conversations about cover-ups and bribes. The crowd watched in horrified silence as William Mitchell's voice filled the room, casually discussing environmental crimes and worker deaths. "These files contain everything," Jess announced. 18 years of environmental destruction, cover-ups, bribery, and murder, all orchestrated by the man you're honoring tonight. The same man who killed my parents and tried to kill me." William's composure finally cracked. The grandfatherly facade fell away, revealing the cold-blooded killer beneath. "Enough!" he snarled, lunging toward Jess, but he never reached her. FBI agents and EPA investigators poured into the ballroom from every entrance, led by Agent Patricia Walsh, who'd been building an environmental crimes case against Mitchell Industries for 12 years. "William Mitchell," Agent Walsh announced, her badge glinting under the crystal chandeliers. "You're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, environmental terrorism, and approximately 80 other federal charges." As they led him away in handcuffs, William turned back to Jess, his eyes blazing with decades of suppressed hatred. "You think this ends it?" he called out. "You think you've won? I have lawyers, judges, half the government in my pocket. I'll be free in a month, and you'll be dead in 2. "Maybe," Jess replied calmly, "but everyone here tonight knows the truth now. And tomorrow, the whole world will see what the Mitchell name really represents." She touched the locket at her throat, its silver surface warm against her skin. "This was supposed to be my inheritance, Uncle, but I'm returning it to the forests, where it belongs, along with every acre of land your family poisoned." The trials took 6 years, but justice ultimately prevailed. William Mitchell was convicted on 87 federal charges and sentenced to life in prison without parole. He died behind bars at the age of 71, his empire dismantled and his assets seized for environmental cleanup efforts. Jess inherited what remained of the legitimate Mitchell holdings, a modest fortune compared to what had been lost to legal fees and fines. But she used every penny to honor her parents' memory, establishing the Edward and Catherine Mitchell Foundation for Environmental Justice. She kept only one property from the vast Mitchell portfolio, a small cabin on the Columbia River where her parents had spent their honeymoon. She lived there simply, working with Brooks's law firm to continue the fight for environmental protection. Frank recovered fully from his ordeal and came to live with her, spending his days teaching neighborhood kids how to fish, while Jess worked to prosecute corporate polluters. On the day marking the 5th anniversary of William's conviction, Jess stood on the riverbank where her mother's body had been found, watching salmon return to waters that were finally clean enough to support life. Daniel Brooks found her there, looking out over water that sparkled in the afternoon sun. "Any regrets?" he asked. Jess touched the simple silver chain at her throat. She'd replaced the ornate locket with her father's wedding ring, the only other piece of jewelry the bank box had contained. "None," she said firmly. "My parents died trying to protect this river, these forests. Frank nearly died protecting me. I won't let their sacrifices be meaningless." "And what about your future? You could go anywhere now, do anything." Jess smiled, watching an eagle soar over the clean water. "I know exactly what I want to do. I want to make sure the environment my father loved is still here for future generations. And I want to make sure no other child grows up not knowing their parents died as heroes." "Your parents would be proud," Brooks said softly. "Both sets of them would," Jess agreed, "and that's all I need." Jessica's transformation from struggling bartender to environmental crusader proves that truth, no matter how deeply buried beneath. Decades of lies and cover-ups has a power that no amount of wealth or influence can suppress. Her story reminds us that heroes don't always emerge from places of privilege. Sometimes they rise from hotel bars and construction worker homes, armed, with nothing but courage and the determination to honor those who came before. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or property, but the strength to fight for justice and the wisdom to transform pain into purpose. Jessica Thompson became Jessica Mitchell not to claim a fortune, but to reclaim her family's honor and ensure that their fight for environmental justice would continue for generations to come. If this story of courage, triumphing over corruption, moved you, please share it with someone who believes in the power of environmental justice. What would you have done in Jessica's place? Stayed hidden and safe, or risked everything to expose the truth about your family's crimes? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that prove the truth will always surface, no matter how deep it's been buried.